Hi guys, so I'm doing my presentation on André Breton. Now, this is a bit of an ironic presentation because really didn't do too much in photography. He was mostly known to be a painter and a poet. However, he is considered to be the grandfather or the creator of abstract art. And the stuff that he did do in photography, it was controversial enough to pique my interest. So, here we go. All right, a little bit of background. Andre was born in 1896 to a modest family of shopkeepers in France. Like I said before, he was one of the main starters in the Surrealist movement. He also dabbled in the Dada movement, but I'll get into that a little later. Later in life, Andre attended medical school. He showed a deep passion towards mental health and mental illness. Halfway through his schooling, he enlisted in the First World War. Right after the war, his medical degree was put to work to help the men that were coming back in wards and mental hospitals. Now, something about this really stuck out to me because this is also the 1920s, and mental health isn't necessarily a thing. I mean, it is, don't get me wrong, but nowadays, you can't throw a rock into a crowd without accidentally hitting someone with PTSD, anxiety, or depression. We all have our own demons, and we all know how to cope with them and cope with each other in a very nice, civilized way. Back in the 1920s, though, if you're caught having a panic attack over hearing a car tire being popped, it somehow gave you flashbacks to the war of seeing your best friend being shot right next to you, you probably get some angry old guy that waddles up to you and says, "Hey, I've seen stuff too. Get over it." And then you go home, develop a drinking habit before prohibition, and then you live your typical 1920s normal depressing life. Now, the people that Andre dealt with, these are the people that were no longer allowed to be trusted on the streets. These are men that were coming back from the war with military training, but were absolutely shattered in the head. They had no idea who they were, what they were doing, but they still had the training to potentially do awful things to regular people in society. And as awful as that is, this is also what heavily inspired Andre's art. Andre was also a big fan of Sigmund Freud, managed to meet him one day and create a good, strong friendship with him. Freud was also a big inspiration for a lot of Andre's work. All right, a career in art. Andre liked to dabble in various techniques such as automatism. In the next slide, I'll have a good representation of what that is. But essentially, it's him suppressing his conscious so his subconscious can come out and draw and create whatever the heck art he wants to do, if that makes sense. In 1916, Andre joined the Dada movement in protest of the war. In the 1920s, Andre would help new and upcoming artists by showcasing them in magazines that he was publishing at the time. Some of these artists include Joan Miro, Picasso, and Max Ernst. In his entire career, Andre wrote about 30 books dedicated towards his art and techniques. The irony is, he's known to have not produced a lot of work, though. However, because of his new act in surrealism, he was a great inspiration towards people like Picasso and Salvador Dali. All right, this is an example of Andre's automatism. This isn't him creating the work, this is his subconscious. This is the egg in the church or the snake, circa 1932. Essentially, this is a collage piece found of different photo prints that he took himself. He put them all together, and this is supposed to represent religion and sex being intermixed. The snake in the title is supposed to represent the snake from the Garden of Eden. Eggs represent fertility. However, the woman is fully clothed. Therefore, it makes the viewer wonder where is the sexuality within this entire piece. However, the sexuality is the woman being fully clothed and obeying the religion to the point where modesty is considered sexual. I am going to be 100% honest. When I was reading through the multiple articles about this, I didn't understand it whatsoever. So I won't blame anyone else for not understanding it. But that's just me. In 1929, Andre was a part of the Surrealist Revolution, and he ended up collabing with Rene Magritte. For Rene's project, Rene ended up painting a naked woman. Andre's response, he ended up gathering up 16 men. They all took photos of each other in a photo booth setting, but they all had their eyes closed and they were all looking away, as if they were like children looking away from something ever so tempting. The 16 photos of men ended up framing Rene's painting with the caption, "I do not see the woman hiding in the forest," even though the woman is so obviously in the center. On the next slide, there is a finished product of the overall project. All of these photos were taken in a photo booth. Alright, so Andre didn't shoot anyone. I added that there for shock value. However, the response that he did get for his second manifesto was shocking enough. He simply stated that the most surrealist act out there was to fire a pistol randomly at a crowd. Now, understandably, the public wasn't too happy about that. There was a good amount of people outraged. A lot of people didn't feel comfortable anymore going to his openings or essentially being around him. Andre, however, took the response a little differently. So instead of giving a simple apology, he decided to create something else. Andre's response to the public outcry was to create a fake pamphlet of himself, almost as if it was in a newsprint, stating that he was charged for a violent act. Now, in this photo, it shows Andre wearing a crown of thorns, just like the one that Jesus was wearing when he was being crucified. So, essentially, within this photo or within this project, Andre has crucified himself for the words that he has chosen to describe and to represent his art. So, instead of an apology, he crucified himself. When I was doing the research for this project, this is the number one image that stuck out to me the most because essentially, when I was reading up on the story and the history of it, this whole act just seemed like a middle finger to the people that were trying to say, hey, I am very uncomfortable by the stuff that you are stating. I mean, his response to it just kind of seemed like he was taking it as a joke or so. I mean, shootings, they're not something to joke about, like that's not funny whatsoever. But his response to it was kind of like, hey, don't take things so personally. This is just art. So, something that I found interesting. This is just the original photo before it was added into the newsprint. I just thought it would be interesting to show. He didn't have any special ways of developing his film or showcasing his prints. Everything that he did was pretty standard. The only thing that I can really find that was, I guess, interesting in photography terms was just the stories and the ideas behind all of his work. Andre died in 1966 due to heart complications. When he died, he was a strong supporter of anarchy, anti fascism, and anti Stalin societies. He was essentially an activist his entire life. Due to the data movement, he started to showcase a lot of work in his art, essentially protesting the world that we were living in and all the terrible stuff that was happening around us. He did end up inspiring people in the surrealism community, such as, like I said, Picasso and Dali. So his legacy does live on since the surrealism movement is still as strong as ever.